Bonjour, hi, and welcome to my apartment atelier. Today, I'll be taking you along on the journey of making a vest for Hobbity history bounding purposes. This is the second of 3 videos in this series, and if you haven't seen the first one yet in which I made the skirt, go check that out when you can. Unlike the skirt, which was self-drafted using the Keystone jacket and dress cutter, I made this vest using a commercial pattern, Black Snail Patterns number 0220, which is an 1890s vest that comes with 2 options for the front view. I'm going with view B here, which is a double-breasted vest with a shawl collar. I decided to trace my pattern pieces out onto large pieces of tracing paper so that I could keep the originals intact for future projects. Spoiler alert, I ended up liking this vest so much that I'm definitely going to be making more in other fabrics lurking under my sewing table. There's a lot of finicky hand sewing and a vague attempt at tailoring coming up, so grab yourself something to drink and maybe a snack too, and when you're back, let's see how this goes. After cutting out my tracing paper pattern, I realized I didn't have any light-colored transfer paper to get all the markings off the pattern and onto my dark fabric. So I tried to be clever and perforated my pieces along the darts to make holes that I thought the chalk could go through. Following some hasty reconstructive surgery on my pattern pieces, I traced them out onto my canvas as well as my linings, facings, and flat linings. For the lining that would be visible inside, I chose a quilting cotton in a fun woodsy print. I went with a dark red dinosaur silk for the collar facing, and finally I decided on a plain black cotton for the flat lining, as that won't be seen inside. For the flat lining pieces, I cut them with the cloth doubled, and then used tailor's tacks to transfer the darts through both layers of the fabric. I traced and cut out the pieces in the fashion fabric, and then thread marked the darts and the roll line of the collar. It's hard to tell, but this is a gorgeous deep peacock teal wool that will be perfect for the cooler weather right now and continue to serve me well through the winter as a layering piece. I marked my seam allowance onto my vest pieces, and then serged them all, doing the flatline fronts as one to secure them at the edges. Then it was time to get the canvas layer basted on. To secure the canvas to the fronts, I first trimmed the canvas back around the edges so that it came just shy of the seam allowance I marked out in chalk. Then I pinned some twill tape down according to the pattern instructions, going along the roll line of the collar and later around the edges as well as the armholes. There were a few raw edges left exposed, so I used a catch stitch all around those bits to secure them to the flat lining, taking care not to go through to the wool. I sewed the back pieces together, then pressed the seam open before top stitching on either side of the center back seam to help keep it open and flat. The next step was to sew the shawl collar facings to the fronts along the edges. My machine doesn't have a seam allowance marker, but I used my sewing gauge to measure it and some washi tape to mark it. After stitching the layers together, I pressed the seam and understitched the red facing to help it lie nicely, then pressed it again for a sharper edge. For the little cinching straps at the back of the vest, I decided to go a bit rogue by making two pairs since I had two matching buckles. I then realized that the buckles were too small for the original pattern pieces here, so I improvised with some long narrow pieces of cabbage from the collar facing cut into long straps. I used a bias tape maker to help me press them into submission before top stitching along the open folded edges. Then I pinned them in place along with the printed cotton that I used for the lining before sewing the side seams. After yet another pressing, I smoothed the printed cotton as best as I could over the canvas interlining, and then layered the collar facing over it. I folded the raw edge of the red fabric underneath itself and pinned it in place, then did the same to the edges of the printed cotton around the armhole. I used a red silk thread and a speedy prick stitch to secure the collar facing to the printed cotton. To finish the armholes, I first cut bias strips out of more red cabbage and used a smaller bias tape maker to press them. I machine stitched around the outside first, then used a prick stitch on the inside. I secured the printed cotton around the armhole by slip stitching it to the twill tape. I also wanted to neaten up and finish the side seams on the inside, so after pressing them down, I used a catch stitch to keep them flat. For the seams at the bottom where the facing pieces were attached, I used a catch stitch on the innermost side of the seam. Then I trimmed down the seam allowance on the other side, cutting about half a centimeter away from the line of understitching before pressing the facing piece up. I pinned the bottom of the facing as it cooled, and then also pinned up the back hem before top stitching it down with the same teal thread that I used along the center back seam. Off camera, a little more catch stitching happened to secure the top edges of the facing to the lining. I also sewed in some velvet trim here and there, mostly to hide any serging that might be visible if I decide to wear the vest open at any point. I attached the buckles to the cinching straps at the back, first by making sure that the bar in the buckle was aligned to the back seam. Then I threaded the left strap through and backstitched the strap down against the buckle edge to secure it and trimmed off the excess. To make eyelets on the opposite straps, I measured and marked where I wanted the holes to go. Then I used an awl to open up the weave of the fabric before stitching it with tight straight stitches all around the opening. As with my dress for the Release the Kalkbrecken project, I decided to make covered buttons for this vest using scraps of matching fabric. The wool was too thick, and while the acorns were cute, I wanted this vest to go with a variety of other pieces and didn't want the buttons to compete with the collar. So I used the red dinosaur silk again. For a small, last-minute, extra fancy touch, I decided to improvise some appliques by trimming some lace scraps and tacking them to the shoulders super quickly. Then I added my tags and called this vest done. As with my walking skirt, I'm not revealing this vest in this video. The full reveal of this outfit, as well as the identity of which of my Hobbity friends is joining me on this adventure, will be coming very quickly though, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on to catch that when it goes up. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram, where I post behind-the-scenes updates on my projects, along with some other scrumptious content, and where you can catch announcements for my videos, as well as other costumers' work on the Costume Entertainment Network. I hope you enjoyed your visit today. À la prochaine!